We will be talking about Kubernetes technical values, and I hope to have a little bit of brainstorming together, so don't hesitate to stand up and say something. And yeah, it's not for myself. We only have 25 minutes, and technical values and brainstorming supposed to be like long session. I will try to be like short and then have opportunity to discuss something. I also wanted to say in advance, I will exaggerate sometimes. Don't take any offense. Please just tell me if I did something, I mean, exaggerated too much, but yeah, I didn't mean anything bad. And I don't like these slides about myself and this photo, but I wanted to highlight a couple of things, so I put the slide in. So first of all, I wanted to highlight that I'm only with Kubernetes for 2 years. So in Kubernetes years and seeing contributors who've been here from the beginning, I can say that I don't know everything, and I know very small portion of everything. So me talking about technical values of Kubernetes, it's like, yeah, I saw something, but I haven't seen everything. So if I'm making a mistake, I'm going wrong direction, you let me know. And this is specifically my view on that. And I also wanted to highlight that I have some standing in open source. I was with OpenTelemetry, and I was a co-founder of OpenTelemetry. It's the second largest project in CNCF. So I know a little bit about values, and I know how communities works. So a little bit of standing. So, and all the contact information if you want to discuss further. And again, with working with open source, working with different platforms and communities, I start seeing more and more of the fact that everybody is a great engineer. Like after a few years into engineering, you become good in design, you become good in coding, so you don't have problems of expressing yourself. What people typically struggle with to become great is when their values don't match the values of the project they apply these values in, apply their contributions into. So values are small traits of a project or software, be it like performance or robustness, like this kind of traits that you always struggle to weight and make a, like embrace one trait and pay less attention to other traits. This is where all the struggles coming from. You can design everything, but your design may not satisfy the project that you're contributing into. And if you're thinking about the values, we already have some selection happened even before we started contributing to Kubernetes. So first, we all software engineers, like most of us. And when you become software engineers, you already express your value that you like things more than people. I mean, you like people, but you like things more. And if you like people more, you probably will become doctor or something like of this nature. And it's not bad that you like things more. It's just in this community where we operate, we tend to value the things more than others. And then in open source, typically people in open source have love to their craft. And not every software engineer have love to their craft. So like you don't work in public unless you want to demonstrate it, or you have like, I mean, again, it's a little bit exaggeration, a little bit oversimplification, but typically this is what's happening. In open source, I also noticed that people who stay in open source typically have less desire for immediate gratification. So instant gratification can be achieved on internal projects way easier than on open source. In open source, you need to build consensus, you need to work with other people. So this value of instant gratification is not in open source. Like some features taking years to be developed, even though internally on different projects it may be developed much faster. Finally, CNCF has their own shadow on top of open source. Like people may like CNCF, may hate CNCF, but it's different beast. It imposes values. And then Kubernetes is, I think it's founding project of CNCF, have all these values reflected in it. I know CNCF project that doesn't reflect all the CNCF values. I think it doesn't, but Kubernetes is very close to what CNCF stands for. And finally, in the Kubernetes, we have different SIGs. But I will not go to SIGs level. I will try to stay on the Kubernetes level. And then once you go through this cycle, like you became a software engineer all the way to you contribute to Kubernetes, you already pass this way, like expressing what you value more, or at least what you value more when you contribute to this to Kubernetes project. So if you come to Kubernetes project and start making contributions that are not aligned with everybody else's values, you probably will lose out, and you will be stressed and confused most of the time. Since you came here and you have these values and you keep working on Kubernetes, you reinforce these values. So it's like infinite cycle of like new people coming to Kubernetes with the same values and reinforcing these values even further. So this is what builds us. Again, you can be working on Kubernetes first half of the day and working on other projects second half of the day, and it's fine. You will express different values. It's not your identity. It's a framework you operate in when you work in Kubernetes. So don't take it too close. I'm not saying that when we're saying that Kubernetes value this trait more than other trait, it's not like you value one trait more than other trait. It's like when you work in Kubernetes, you will express this trait more often than this trait. So it's not your identity. And I joined the Kubernetes. I intentionally moved from OpenTelemetry to Kubernetes. It was my desire to go into this community. I learned a lot being here. And I wanted to find out what the values of Kubernetes. And I wanted to find out some written documents saying like, this is our values, this is how we develop code. And I didn't find any. Maybe it's good I didn't find any because I needed to develop it for myself. I need to look at reality versus what is declared. As you can see, like people may declare some values, but express different values when asked about it or when they actually looking at things and working on things. So what's written? I kept searching what's written about the values, and I found charter of CNCF that has technical values. Like I think it's just called values. And again, Kubernetes is the founding project of CNCF. So likely this values was written based on community was formed about Kubernetes. And some of them resonated with me very much. Like let's say fast is better than slow. It's a very first technical principle of CNCF, and I think that's what Kubernetes stands behind. I think that we don't express all these values though. I may be wrong, but I think some of these values are declared by CNCF, and maybe they are applicable to CNCF more than Kubernetes. I have slides for every one of them, but I don't want to go deep into details. So fast is better than slow is, I want to highlight this again. So I think it resonated with me a lot when I joined Kubernetes because I used to work in projects that doesn't have that much of aggressive pursuing users to switch to something new. So we deprecate things very actively. We pursue customers to adopt features very aggressively. And it's good and bad. It's just values that we have as community. And we express it too often. I mean, all the time. I wouldn't stop on all this. I think it's self-explanatory. And I wanted to know, I didn't find anything written. I started asking around what Kubernetes want to be, what we want to express. And I spoke with many people saying that Kubernetes used to be the startup feeling project, and now it's moving into this enterprise system. And when you looking at values that projects supposed to have when it's moved from startup to enterprise level, you think that culture needs to change. You think the values needs to change. And I think what we're doing in our community right now is a good example how values can be changed by placing some process around it. And again, changing values is hard. Once you change the values, you may attract different type of people, and some people who used to contribute a lot, they will be disincentivized, like they wouldn't want to contribute any longer. But this is what it is. Project changes, and we need to embrace this change. And two examples that I wanted to list here is perma-beta elimination. We don't want to keep features in beta for that long. And perma-beta is great for velocity. Now we're moving a little bit away from velocity by forcing people to get into GA stage. Like good example is, I mean, a Signode device manager is still in beta, and we're already thinking about next generation of device manager. We didn't even want to put it in GA yet. But enterprise needs different values. We need to get it to GA, and I think that's what we will do in 127. And second example is prod readiness review. Our CAP process getting more and more elaborate, and prod readiness review is one of the examples when we try to impose this value. Like you need to think about maintainability. You need to think about specific metrics you want to collect out of this feature. And so another example of attempt to change the culture by imposing process. I think it's enough introduction. I want to get into, another thing I wanted to highlight is when I looked at PRs, I thought that PRs is I look at PRs, what people review, how they review PRs. Maybe this will give me indication what the culture is. And I found that sometimes it's really hard to understand the culture from PRs, PR reviews. I had a feeling about some values that people imposed and expressed, but then talking to these people, I realized that their real intent was always different. So they may ask about whether you tested it, but their real problem was that they wanted to highlight that there is no, you haven't thought about this scenario. So they never, sometimes people don't say that they care about this scenario specifically. They will just say, can you put unit test in this specific location? And okay, are you caring about reliability because you want unit test, or you care about this specific scenario because so sometimes intent is not clear. We also have a lack of time from contributors, and it's really challenging to understand what people want from CAP review, for instance, when person who can approve this CAP review doesn't have time to discuss it with you. So if you have a design proposal and you trying to understand this trade-off between one value and another value, you may not get a clear answer just because there is lack of time. So you need to go through that. And that's why finding values through observing is always sometimes hard. That's why probably we need to write it down at some point. Next. And now I wanted to go into actual discussion and brainstorming. I think it's enough introduction. And I will start with my couple anecdotes. And I actually don't know how it will go. If you will get into real good brainstorming and everybody will want to share something, we can go there, but I have more slides as a backup so we can get there. So a couple anecdotes. When I just joined, one of the first PRs I reviewed was PR fixing tests. And tests were expecting certain properties. I don't remember which properties, but a list of something. And the test was expecting this list of something in specific order. And Golang doesn't give you things in specific order when you use some hash map or something. And the fix for this problem was not to fix test to understand any order ever, but the fix was to sort values before you returning them in API. So for me, it was mind-blowing. I came from monitoring space, performance was on top of everything. And here you sort things just to make them predictably out from API surface. It was different, my mind shift for me, it was a clear highlight that performance is not the goal in Kubernetes. And again, it's not bad, it just, this is we care consistency and predictability more than performance. And second example is new is always better. I was really impressed how Kubernetes is bold in changing things. One example is gRPC probes that we introduced in Signode recently. What happened is we have an API for probes, and this API support named ports. And named ports arguably was not the best decision ever when designing an API. So decision was to just don't follow the same pattern. We have 3 types of probes that support named ports, and 4 probes that don't support named probes. And it was fine because it's like we need to do things better. We need to improve engineering. And like, again, I understand this value now. I understand where it's coming from, but it was a mind-blowing for me that we don't, like, we would care about new and better engineering more than consistency with old things. And another example, like you all know how often we change how we build stuff, and like we already have, like we have kubetest 1 and have kubetest 2, and like it's like we constantly trying to change something, adapt new Golang version, adapt new frameworks. So this is another example when we strive for new and better engineering all the time. So this is 2 of my anecdotes. If somebody wants to share something and have thoughts right now, we can go into discussion or. No? Okay. I was prepared. So I don't know if you saw this talk by Brian Cantil. I really enjoy all his talks, and this was one of the inspirational one. I don't care about Rust that much. He just, like in the bottom there. But his way explaining things about values that different languages and frameworks express was very inspirational for me. And he put the slides, like I just copied bluntly out of his slides what values may exist. It's not a full list by no means. And one way to go about it is to look at specific values and decide which, like whether it's applicable, whether it's important for Kubernetes or less important for Kubernetes. For instance, go ahead.
Looking at the Docker shim deprecation as a lesson, I think minimizing user surprise, I think is probably an evolving value here. The deprecation policy KEPs in general as a way to make sure that instead of just checking stuff in willy-nilly, we have a chance for people to get ready and see it and be prepared for it and integrate it. So I don't know where that fits with Brian's list here, but that does seem to be sort of an evolving value of the community.
Do you feel it's a lacking value or it's a value we express widely? Do you feel we expressed this value or we lacking this value? I think it's compatibility, number 3 here.
Well, I mean, compatibility is one thing. I think the project is not afraid of making breaking changes, like you said. Mm-hmm. And also we want to minimize surprise for users. So there's a balance between those things that I don't think is expressed here. Like, predictability may be a good way to talk about it, right? We want people to, again, just that minimize of surprise is the way that I would say it. I don't know. I don't know if others agree. I'll let folks speak up.
Okay. Thank you. Any other opinions? Okay. Let's talk about this way. So, I don't know if you saw this meme, this person with a cup saying, change my mind. So I think Kubernetes value, one of the Kubernetes value is opinionated APIs and scenarios over expressiveness. So we don't care of expressiveness that much. Kubernetes has opportunity to support many scenarios, but we picked few and we support them well. Do you agree with that?
I agree what we are having a lot of opinionated APIs. I don't agree what we are working well. So, like, there are several scenarios what was implemented to accommodate the use case what we see right now. But in a few years, something is get changed. Like either how a pattern of application get used is changed, like new hardware comes, complexity of hardware increases and so on. And that practically like constrain us to evolve in some areas.
I think it kind of depends on your view of Kubernetes. If you view Kubernetes as a platform to build platforms, you probably want more flexibility. If you view Kubernetes as the platform, then you maybe want a little more opinionated APIs. So I think it depends on your perspective of what Kubernetes is.
But what do you personally think about what we express as a community? Okay.
One example I can think of actually here is Knative, or native, depending how you say it. Knative, yeah. So if you look at Kubernetes, it's got a ton of tweaks and knobs on that pod resource and things like that. But quite a lot of users just want to run an application, and they want to say, here's my image. And so I agree. I think it depends on kind of where you're targeting there, because Knative itself, I'd say that's more of an opinionated API, which builds on top of the expressiveness and kind of simplifies it.
I mean, the original, one of the ideas was Unix philosophy, a set of small, sharp tools that compose well together, which I think, is on the expressiveness end, as opposed to, essentially, I think there's places where we screwed that up, like the service object, is everything in a kitchen sink. It's very opinionated, but it's also been limited, and I think we've seen that with the shift to the Gateway API, we've actually erred on something that's more flexible and more expressive versus something that's more opinionated.
Okay, so you think we had this less expressive before, but we moving into more expressive direction. And I hear it from you as well, that we want to be more expressive. Okay. I think we almost out of time, but I have a couple more. I already talked about performance, maintainability. Yeah, this is one of the maintainability and operability is always afterthought on most of the work we're doing. Agree, disagree? I can say the same about security, by the way.
Like, I think, yeah, Joe just said, like, I think we kind of want to focus on maintainability. And it's, when you see in a pull request review, like, how are we going to actually iterate or evolve this feature and thinking about the next things, not boxing ourselves into certain API decisions is something quite key. So I think I would class that as maintainability, being able to like extend it and continue to develop it. So I'd like to think, and maybe this is the hopeful, like what I want our values to be is maintainability is actually like at the forefront of that. Whether or not it is, it's another question, I suppose.
Yeah, and I put this after a few PRs I reviewed. One PR is specifically something was too long to initialize, and message, like log message, was too often viewed in log file. So people just wanted to hide this message, saying like, okay, it's too often shows up, like let's not show this message at all. And this is some kind of pattern I see, observe, but I agree with it. Like production readiness review is something that we do to fix it. And again, I'm exaggerating and like trying to be a little bit on other side.
The difference between maintainability and operability, and I think, James was, I think, referring to maintainability as in like, how do the project maintainers evolve things over time? But then I think there's operability of like, how easy is it for users to operate and debug and, and maintain a running Kubernetes system. And so, two sides to that, I think, and so it's worth teasing those apart.
Yeah, okay.
I think this is something that you find anywhere, not just in the Kubernetes project, of course. If you bring this up in any technical community and you say maintainability is always an afterthought, everyone's going to nod. Yeah. But I think the real answer is the true answer of all of tech. It depends on where you are. Different groups put maintainability in different places in their cycles. Some groups value it more highly and put it earlier in their work. Some groups are just overworked and don't have time to think as much about maintainability early on. So I definitely hear a lot of conversations in the Kubernetes community where they're trying to integrate maintainability early on, but it doesn't always happen and the community is large, so I'm sure it depends.
Okay, and we finally out of time. I wanted to highlight that, again, coming to one of my previous slides, something we express as a value, not always something we want to be as a value for community, and we try to put some processes in place. I'd like to have some values written down, so we will declare what we want, and maybe side list what we actually have. And I was trying to put it some way here, but I may be wrong. And this is something I want to keep discussing. So maybe whoever interested can reach out to me and we can work together declaring what we want and understanding where we are. Thank you.